It's my privilege to introduce to you Chris Husbands, who's going to be speaking. Let me just tell you a few things about him. First of all, the Institute of Education at the University of London, we consider it to be a sister institution. It is one of the great centers in the world for the study of education. One of the leading centers, one of the most important in terms of formative thought and deep thinking about education. And we think we're that also. This is an important center for the study of education. We're about the same size. We're both in great cities of the world, which is part of the framework for this talk that we're going to hear. Chris Husbands is the director of the Institute of Education at the University of London and a professor there. He has his educational background. He went to Cambridge University and studied history, graduating at the top of his class. And he went on to complete a doctorate at Cambridge. And then he prepared to be a teacher. And he went into urban education, urban public school teaching, and has deep background and experience in working in the urban context, both as a teacher and as an administrator before he went into higher education. He became director of the Institute of Education at, I'm going to say Warwick, but it should be Warwick University in 2000. And he established there the National Academy for Gifted and Talented Youth. And he led the teacher education programs of that university to become one of the top in the country. He then became Dean of Education and Lifelong Learning at the University of East Anglia, and he played a leading role in creating a new university campus. He was appointed as a professor at IOE in London in 2007, and he became director in 2011. Let me just tell you a little bit about his research before he begins. He's especially interested in looking at educational outcomes for children, and also the quality of teaching and how to improve it. He was director of the National Evaluation of Children's Trusts, which explored relationships between teachers and other professionals in supporting the well-being of children. So he has a comprehensive notion of the well-being of young people. He's done research recently and technical assistance in 5 North Indian states around creating teaching schools and, again, focusing on children and educational outcomes. He's part of a group that wrote a report called Transforming Teacher Education, and he's written widely on education policy, teacher development, the curriculum, and he still retains an interest in the teaching of history. In 2011, he published his latest book called Learning History, Teaching History. So with that, I introduce Chris Husbands. Welcome.
When I was asked to speak, I thought that it might be interesting if I talked a little bit about education in London and the experience of educational change over the last decade. So I'm going to talk about schools. I'm going to look about the potential of schools to make any significant impact on children's lives. And in a world which I think is sharply divided between pessimists and optimists, I'm going to cheerfully line myself up with the optimists. So I want to talk about education. I want to talk about education in one city. There it is, under a threatening sky. The weather's not quite as good in London there as it is in New York at the moment. I want to talk about London, but I want to talk ideally with some implications for the way we think about education, the way we think about reform, schools, and teaching elsewhere. Now, I know from experience that it's incredibly difficult to talk about education in international settings. So much of the details of education are specific to the country, to the school district, to the school, to the teacher, to the pupil. That the details sound parochial or dull when they're presented to others. But generalizations, on the other hand, about global drivers for educational change run the risk of becoming platitudes of no interest to anyone. One of the really significant We haven't got the clicker working. One of the really significant changes in the way we think about education over my lifetime has been the shift to thinking about education in global and transnational contexts. And what are flashing up on the screen now are a whole series of simply photographs of classrooms. And they all, in different ways, despite their different size, their different shape, their different configuration, they all look recognizable. If we think about improvement in education, it's thinking about outcomes for children and young people like that. I'm particularly keenly aware of the dangers of coming to North America to talk about English and London schools. What I find interesting and innovative, you might find dull and predictable. What we find wholly expected, you might find distinctive and valuable in different ways. But I am going to talk about London, and I'm going to talk about London as a world city. Some recognizable photographs flashing up at the moment. You will recognize all of them. The opening ceremony of the Olympics, and ending with a photograph of the Institute of Education. Red buses, black cabs, busbies, palaces, and castles. That's London. How do I talk about education in London to you? Well, what I'm going to do is to tell you a story, and I'm going to tell you a story as a traveller might see it. I'm going to look at it as a traveller might see it flying into London and coming into land, taking the view from 24,000, 12,000, 1,000 feet, and then on the ground. And then before the end of the lecture, we'll take off again and look back to reflect on what we've seen. So we'll begin with the city from 24,000 feet. And there it is. It's all there, but the details are indistinct. As an education entity, London is large. Its schools educate 1.3 million children in about 2,200 public schools, taught by 65,000 teachers. And the comparisons with New York are flashed up on that slide. Unlike many cities, London's schools don't have a single governance structure. There's no chancellor for London schools. Policy is directed by the central government, by the English government, with formal responsibility for schooling across London split between 32 separate boroughs, school districts, if you will. Like all public school systems in urban areas, London's school population is incredibly diverse. A quarter of the pupils are eligible for free school meals. We'll take that as an indicator of poverty, compared to about 11% nationally. Under half of those of compulsory schooling age in London are white, compared to 82% nationally. Significantly more London children are in private schools than nationally. 44% of 11-year-olds in London and a third of 16-year-olds speak English as a second language. There are over 150 different languages spoken in London schools, with relatively high degrees of linguistic and therefore ethnic concentration. That map demonstrates the distribution of English-speaking pupils. That map demonstrates the distribution, just as one example, of Somali-speaking pupils across London. Now, I don't think that linguistic diversity or linguistic concentration is necessarily a disadvantage. Many groups in migrant populations generally have a strong commitment to education. But while London schools have all the richness that comes from diversity, they have all the challenges too. London is a deeply divided city economically. I imagine pretty much like New York. Areas of spectacular wealth and grinding poverty coexist. And what I like to say is that within a mile of the IOE, at the heart of London, you come across every significant educational challenge of the 21st century: participation, expectations, teacher recruitment, teaching quality, school governance, curriculum relevance, curriculum stretch, and so on. So that's the view from 24,000 feet. Let's go in a little closer. This is the view from 12,000 feet. So at 12,000 feet, the city looks more distinctive, and we can start to make out the lines of what I'm going to call a London miracle. Because England is the only country in the developed world where the performance of pupils in schools in the capital exceeds that of their peers nationally. London schools outperform schools in the rest of England throughout the compulsory stages of schooling, from tests of pupils' phonological awareness at the age of 6 to school leaving examinations at the age of 16. And to take the example of the school leaving examination, the GCSE, up on that slide, last but one line, 62% of London pupils achieved 5 A-star to C grades, including English and Maths, which is our school certification benchmark, compared to 58% nationally. All groups of pupils do better in London than their peers nationally. And pupils who are eligible for free school meals, poor children, fare particularly well. The socio-economic attainment gap at GCSE is 19 points in London against 27 points nationally. The advantage that Chinese and Asian pupils have over their peers in terms of GCSE attainment is multiplied if they live in London. As a reflection of this performance, Ofsted, that's our National Schools Inspectorate, judges that 75% of London schools are good or outstanding, compared to less than 75%, compared to 69% of schools nationally. 27% of London schools are outstanding, compared to just 20% nationally. Now, all of these figures, comparing the London position with the national position, are relatively small, but they are consistent. For individual pupils, for groups of pupils, for schools, London schools do better than schools nationally. That is against a background, as we've seen, I go back to 24,000 feet, against a background of significantly greater poverty in London and significantly greater linguistic and ethnic diversity. What's also the case is that these distinctions that I've been drawing between London and the rest of the country mask the improvement over time. Between 2003 and 2006, the national rate of improvement in the number of students achieving 5 or more A-star to C passes at GCSE was 6.7%. In London, it was 8.4%. And in the most challenged London schools, it was almost 13%. That's the view from 12,000 feet, a view of an impressive educational performance across the whole age and demographic range. Well, we now move in to 1,000 feet. At 1,000 feet, individual buildings and people emerge. We can start to see what individuals do. And from this height, I want to focus on the framework of initiatives that account for the transformation in London that I've sketched out. And that's the program called London Challenge. Because the high performance of London schools that I've described to you so far was not the case 10 years ago. It's not something that flows automatically from demography. It is not something that flows automatically from diversity. It is something that happened over a concentrated period, and substantially, it was the result of London Challenge. So London Challenge was established in 2003. And it was established to improve outcomes in low-performing high schools in London. Elementary schools were included in the programme from 2008. The programme was scheduled to run until 2010, but in fact it closed a year later, 2011, partly because its success meant that similar interventions were being rolled out nationally. And London Challenge began with the 4 commitments that you see on this slide. A commitment for every pupil, a commitment for every teacher, a commitment for every school, and a commitment for every parent. That every pupil should be able to achieve potential, that every teacher should be proud to be part of an education system delivering excellence for all young people, that every school should be good at the basics and striving for excellence in areas of strength, with a distinct mission and a commitment to collaboration, and that every parent should have confidence in a choice of local schools that can provide an excellent education. London Challenge incorporated many elements, but the most important, and I'm going to explore them in some detail, the most important were the use of data to map out families of schools sharing similar contexts and intakes, and to identify areas of strength and weakness within schools. There are, as we saw, something like 400 secondary high schools in London. The schools were grouped, for the purposes of London Challenge, into 23 families, each family of about 20 schools, and the grouping on the basis of close analysis of demographic and intake characteristics. And the groupings were then used to identify schools in similar contexts, producing differential results in different parts of the curriculum. So a severely challenged, socioeconomically challenged school that was good at maths, maybe in one family able to work with other schools in that family who were less good at maths, another school in the family with strengths in English, and so on. The second focus of London Challenge was a focus on improving the quality of teaching, not through the use of external consultants or advisors, but through school-to-school support. School-to-school support brokered by experienced advisors and supplemented by a variety of initiatives to diversify and improve the supply of teachers. And thirdly, come on to this in a little more detail later, the conversion of the most struggling schools into academies, which are akin to your charter schools. And the academies created under London Challenge were created with significant investment in new building and significant commitment to innovation. Across the 7 years of London Challenge, 212 London high schools, that's nearly half the schools, received support at some stage. 296 primary or elementary schools, that's about 15%, participated in the programme. And 74 schools across London provided support to other schools. Central government, the Department for Education, met the costs of the programme. Funding was provided through what were in effect vouchers to be spent as agreed with London Challenge advisors. And to give you a sense of the scale, typically, over the period of the intervention, between $50,000 and $100,000 was normally spent on a school. And the investment was substantially to improve the quality of teaching, and funds were therefore predominantly spent on training for teachers and cover for teacher release. Now, London Challenge has been very extensively reviewed. The evidence suggests 6 main reasons for its success. 2 relate to beliefs, 2 relate to leadership practices, and 2 relate to schooling structures. And I'll begin with beliefs that relate to belief. Sorry, to begin with the factors that relate to beliefs. One of the things that London Challenge worked on early in its life was to communicate high expectations for all learners, irrespective of their background or circumstances. Huge investment in changing assumptions about what children and young people were capable of achieving. The belief was actively promoted to school principals. It was actively promoted by school principals, and the London Challenge advisors who worked with school principals were particularly active in shifting the mindset to focus on high expectations for all. Early successes, unexpected successes, were publicly celebrated. The main purpose of this part of the programme was to convince everyone, school leaders, school teachers, parents, stakeholders, that there were successes in London schools, that they were things to be proud of. It was to change the music around schooling in London. The second belief that underpinned London Challenge was a shared moral purpose about education in London. Individual London schools had always been good at thinking about the needs of their own pupils. School leaders thinking really hard about what's best for the children in my school. But London Challenge asked them to do something different. It asked head teachers not to think primarily about the needs of pupils at their own school, but to think about the needs of all pupils. To take pride in being part of a citywide education system, and to be open and collaborative about sharing problems. Difficult to place children were no longer to be treated as children to be exported to another school. Hard to teach children were not children to be excluded and shipped out. Enormous work was done to build a sense of commitment to the education of all children, sharing teachers across schools, sharing curriculum programs, sharing successful resources. So those two beliefs, a belief in high expectations and a belief in a shared moral purpose about the education of our children in this city, were the two first building blocks of London Challenge. The next two building blocks relate to leadership practices. London Challenge placed enormous emphasis on a group of experienced and credible advisors and mentors. The work of London Challenge hinged on the work of these London Challenge advisors. They worked closely with schools to identify weaknesses, not publicly, but privately, to assign mentors to the schools, to identify partner schools, and to broker interventions, not to provide interventions, but to broker interventions. So who were the London Challenge advisors? The advisors were typically outstanding school leaders who were knowledgeable about what interventions and partnerships would work best for the schools they were supporting, and who were skilled at building a sense of mutual trust. And the London Challenge advisors were critical to the long-term success of London Challenge. The second leadership practice was an effective, strategic use of data. The families of schools were built from intake and contextual data. And the families of schools data, each family normally encompassing between 15 and 20 secondary schools, the families of schools data forced individual schools to accept that some schools in very similar settings were performing very differently. That schools with very similar contextual intake data were doing much better, not necessarily across all curriculum domains, but in some. Some families of schools, some schools in the family doing particularly well in science, some in mathematics, some in language. And the school level data presented in depth and detail and richness, looking at three things: looking at contextual data, intake data, looking at absolute performance data, and looking at progress data. The school level data provided unarguable grounds for action. Alongside the use and identification of families of schools data, London Challenge built capacity amongst schools in using pupil data to greater effect, allowing them to identify pupils and groups of pupils at risk of underachievement early on. So we've talked about two beliefs and two leadership practices. There were then two structures. The element of London Challenge that has been picked up in subsequent policy interventions most clearly has been the systematic and effective use of what we've called school-to-school support. London Challenge advisors put together bespoke support programs for London schools, focused primarily on improving the quality of teaching and school leadership. There was a strong coaching element. It was mostly provided by other schools. It did not involve teachers or head teachers, teachers or school principals going on courses. It did not involve external experts telling them what to do. It was focused on coaching, it was focused on training, it was focused on school-to-school support. And the intensive approach of the training, learning, discussion, live teaching, observing others teach, practical implementation, was deemed to be much more effective than a traditional model of professional development or attending an off-site course. As the families of schools developed, working with teachers from other schools in similar challenges enabled frank discussion between teachers of the strengths and weaknesses in their own teaching. And in this way, London Challenge helped the city reach a tipping point in favour of schools, school leaders, and teachers themselves, serving as the primary drivers of improvement. And one of the things that we appeared to learn from London Challenge, which I think is a transferable lesson, is that under the right circumstances, schools have an untapped capacity to improve themselves. The final element of London Challenge was innovation in schooling. I've so far sketched a largely collaborative approach. School-to-school support, coaching, mentoring, the use of data. But the most underperforming schools were challenged, and they were challenged in very tough ways. Over 50 high schools, that's 1 in 8 of all London's high schools, were replaced with academies, the English equivalent of charter schools. The use of academies was used to send a strong signal to local communities about the importance with which their educational situation was being treated. It was also intended to revitalise and to provide greater freedoms for schools to innovate as appropriate to turn around their performance. Lord Adonis, who had been Tony Blair's chief policy advisor on education and went on to be Minister for Schools between 2005 and 2007, and who is still a major figure in education reform in England, cites London Challenge and academisation specifically in London's success, championing the boldness of London's boroughs in embracing reforms and citing London as a pathfinder for school improvement. As for many policy programmes, the mix of interventions that London Challenge incorporated means that it's difficult to identify which particular parts of the intervention had the most positive effect. The moral commitment to improvement, the high expectations for all, the programmes of coaching and mentoring, the school-to-school support. But our National Inspectorate is clear that school-to-school collaboration was a key driver for the improvement seen between 2003 and 2010. And it also built capacity into the system. 6 of the 85 most struggling schools at the start of London Challenge have now been classified by Ofsted as outstanding schools, and they are themselves providing support to others. And just by way of illustration, I want, in this swoop down from 24,000 to 12,000 to 1,000 feet, we now land. And we land there, outside a school. That is a school, it's called Morpeth School. It's in the London borough of Tower Hamlets. Now, to give you some data on Morpeth, there is Morpeth, and there's the head teacher of Morpeth School, Alistair MacDonald. Alistair MacDonald was in fact knighted for his services to education. He's now Sir Alistair MacDonald. He is still head teacher of Morpeth School. He's actually retiring next year, and all of the data that follows on the next 3 slides comes from him last week. You'll see the data that it has about 1,100 pupils. 55% of those pupils meet the criterion for free school meals, against 23% for London as a whole and 11% for England. And you'll see that 64% of the pupils speak English as a second language, compared to 33% in London and 6% in England as a whole. That's the front of Morpeth School. It's a Victorian school building. The backdrop to this slide is the recent addition to Morpeth, which looks rather different. Tower Hamlets is the most deprived school district in England. You probably need to know that it is now the 2nd highest performing school district in England. This data presents examination attainment at Morpeth over the last 5 years. Looking at the benchmark indicator, 5A to C GCSEs, including English and mathematics. Morpeth is the blue column, Tower Hamlets the red, and England as a whole the yellow. And you'll see that by 2012, that's this year's data, Morpeth is outperforming England as a whole, and Tower Hamlets is also outperforming England as a whole. What I also have is the latest school inspection report on Morpeth. I'm going to put up some extracts from the inspection on the next slide. Because they're quotations from an inspection report, it's quite a busy slide. I will atypically read what is on it. So it says, Morpeth is an outstanding school, an orderly and purposeful environment in which pupils thrive. The tone is set by the school's outstanding head teacher and leadership team. Staff are trusted and valued. Expectations of all pupils, social and academic achievement are high, and the school is deeply embedded in the life of the area it serves. Pupils are proud of their school, of what they achieve there, and of how it prepares them for life afterwards. And then it says, pupils' attainment is well below average when they start. However, their progress is outstanding, gathering pace the longer they spend at the school and enabling them to outstrip their peers nationally. Overall, standards reached by the end of year 11, by the age of 16, are well above average. So it's really interesting to come down and to look at Morpeth. If you want to read the Morpeth School Inspection Report, you can do that if you go to www.ofsted.gov.uk and search for Morpeth. Now, Morpeth played a key role in London Challenge. It received support from other schools, and it provided support to other schools. The head teacher and his leadership team made a continued contribution across London schools. So very quickly, it's been a quick visit, we'll now take off. And I want to try and suggest what lessons there are about improving urban schools from London, from the experience of London. The experience of London over the last 10 years has been a success. It is not a success that is automatic, that was read off from the characteristics of its schools. It was the result of a concerted, integrated effort with those 6 elements, and I'll come back to those in a moment. On this slide, a reminder of how London Challenge worked. Support from an experienced advisor who had credibility with schools, an audit of the school's improvement needs drawn up by the advisor, identification and monitoring of support by a partnership board that was always chaired by the advisor, but was attended by school governors, they are normally members of the local community, school leaders, their mentors, and school district representatives, and support through the improvement of teaching quality, largely through school-to-school support. Now, I don't think that any of those works without the others. School-to-school support can be cosy and uncritical, in which we can all say how difficult our jobs are. What gave the edge to school-to-school support was the use of data in families of schools and the role of the advisor in coaching and mentoring. But the role of the advisor isn't critical on its own. We've all had experience of advisors who come into urban schools, who tell us how to improve them, and then leave. These were advisors who themselves were school leaders, and they were brokering the school-to-school support. So London Challenge is a package, and it's an integral and integrated package. It is a coherent and systematic program of support and challenge. Now, I'm not going to suggest that London Challenge had all the answers. There are serious educational and cultural challenges remaining for the city. In 2012, it's still the case that 15,000 children left London elementary schools struggling with English, maths, or both, and that 28,000 school pupils left high school without the basic school leaving certificate of 5 GCSEs, including English and maths. There are continuing problems of school absence, exclusion, and permanent exclusion, particularly amongst traveller, special educational needs, and Afro-Caribbean pupils. But the successes of London Challenge are considerable. And I'll just look at two sets of data. Okay. What this chart shows you is outcomes for the attainment of pupils on free school meals. Children whose families are poor enough for them to qualify for free school meals. And it sorts them by local authority area, by school district. So on the left-hand side, you've got the worst performing local authority for free school meal pupils. On the right-hand side, you've got the best performing local authority for children on free school meals. Now, you're an attentive and observant audience, and you will notice that some of those bars are red and some of them are blue. The red bars are London local authorities. Consistently, this is 2011 data, consistently at the right-hand side of the chart, succeeding with children on free school meals. The next chart, I think, is in some respects even more interesting. It's quite a complicated chart to understand. And I'm not going to disaggregate it into London and out of London. You're just going to take my word for it that there's a London factor here. Let me explain the chart to you. This is about pupil attainment and school disadvantage. The blue line across the middle of the chart is the national average pupil performance at the age of 16, calculated on a point score that's worked out by giving 8 points for an A star, 7 for an A, 6 for a B, and so on. Okay. The x-axis shows you English schools that are grouped by the proportion of children eligible for free school meals. So if we take the first box and whisker chart on the left, that is of relatively advantaged schools who've got between 0 and 5% of their pupils on free school meals. And at the other extreme, you've got disadvantaged schools with a very large proportion of their intake on free school meals. And what you've then got, the diamonds, are the performance of free school meal pupils in each of those bands. And you notice, I think, two things about the chart. The first is that in every category, there are schools where the performance of children on free school meals exceeds the national average. There are high-performing schools for poor children in every category, even if in every category the average performance of free school meals is below the national average. The second, which I just think is really interesting, is that the rough shape of free school meal performance is what we've taken to describing as a smile. Free school meal pupils in general seem to do better in relatively advantaged schools where there are not many of them, but also in schools where they're highly concentrated and probably where systems are built around their needs. What are the lessons from London Challenge? Well, I think the lessons from London Challenge are summarised in that slide, which presents to you the data, the information about the major ingredients that I've already talked about. Commitment, leadership, and systems. High expectations, shared moral purpose. If this slide was a stage, those things would be sitting at the back of the stage as the backdrop, setting the tone for the action happening in front of them. Clear and consistent leadership and the employment of experienced and successful advisors. And then really good systems that build partnerships with successful schools to broker school support, the use of innovative schools, and, as I've said, robust systems to track pupil progress. Now, this is a story that I could have told you at any point in the last 2 years. You'll remember that I said that London Challenge was due to end in 2010. And early on, the evidence, get to it, is of significant improvement in London schools. But of course, you will be aware that a huge amount has changed in London over the last 3 years. A left-of-centre social democratic government has been replaced by a right-of-centre conservative-led coalition. The economic crisis of 2007 has produced a crisis of the welfare state as cuts in public provision bite. The mood music around education policy has shifted markedly. There's been an increasingly strident view that all schools, through rigorous insistence on conformity and standards, on high expectations, and a no-excuses culture, can instill educational values that will allow young people to triumph over adversity. The focus on the last 2 years has not been on school-to-school support, but on individual schools. And successes of individual schools, such as the widely quoted Mossbourne Academy, are held up as examples. The freedom of academy status is now presented as the key to success rather than collaboration and school-to-school support. And all this is accompanied by a new preoccupation with international rankings. There is a dramatic new turn in education policy in England. Its political roots, deregulatory, devolutionary, are clear. The outcomes are unclear. The Academy's policy of the new Labour government throughout London Challenge tried to use academy status mainly to prioritise the improvement of failing schools. The Conservative-led coalition has extended the option of academy status to virtually all schools, moving a much greater proportion of schools to the independence associated with charter status. As that happens, the networks of schools on which London Challenge depended are likely to begin to erode and to fray. In 2011, Ofsted visited 6 former London Challenge schools that had become academies. To quote its report on the visits, in 5 of these schools, the change of designation appeared to have separated them from the networks of support that they once enjoyed. Their commitment to school improvement had become much narrower, much more limited. In most of the cases the inspectors encountered, they were working with other academies rather than their local schools. Ofsted concluded this risks leading to separate networks of expertise. Within coalition policy, there remains an emphasis on successful schools and school leaders supporting struggling ones. But the academy's policy is increasingly fraying local structures. Chains of academies are being encouraged, and some groups of elementary schools are converting to academy status together. But it's not the systematic pairing that we saw under London Challenge. It's not rooted in that sense of the wider interdependence of schools and teachers' moral and professional accountability that succeeded in 2003 through 2010. Indeed, early evidence suggests that successful schools converting to academy status are not taking on supportive roles that's often expected of them. Between May and November this year, I sat on an independent commission to assess the likely impact of rapid academisation, rapid chartering, that's currently underway in England. Our overwhelming conclusion was that the shift to academy status alone is not enough to raise school standards. Securing real and lasting improvements in achievement and learning requires more. A relentless effort to change the practice of teaching in thousands of classrooms so that its impact on children's learning outcomes becomes greater. In making recommendations to government to extend the kind of collaboration promoted by London Challenge, our Commission saw the need for central drivers and direction, whether they're about inspection criteria or funding and support, but linked with local networks that drove improvements. Now, London has done incredibly well. It's substantially improved historic levels of poor educational performance. Areas of educational disadvantage have become areas of success. And we've got schools like Morpeth making a huge difference to the life chances of young people in their communities. Under the coalition government, the focal point and the goalposts have changed to a more firmly market-driven path to improvement. Concerns increasingly about whether the ambition of London Challenge was enough. But I think it's a mistake to move away from the vision of London Challenge. Politics is at play. London Challenge was the policy of a left-of-centre government, now replaced by a right-of-centre government. But an important question for policymakers is to work out whether the depth of collaboration that London Challenge helped to establish, and which contributed so much to education in the capital, can genuinely thrive as schools move apart. The political and educational challenge of holding schools together, of holding diverse schools in a diverse city together, remains. Now, there are no easy lessons from London Challenge. It achieved a great deal. It didn't achieve everything. But it did demonstrate that in urban education, schools can make a difference provided they receive support and challenge, which is systematic and which itself needs to be nurtured. The lessons of London Challenge, I think, are important as we think about the overall architecture for urban school reform. Thank you very much. Okay, so when I said that the average spend was between $50,000 and $90,000 per school, what that's partly to do is to buy teacher time during the school day. Because if you really want your school to support to be classroom-based, it can't happen in the evening, because by then the pupils have gone. So it's mostly during the school day, and it's located as closely as possible to the ordinary work of schools. So, as far as possible, locate it within the school day. It is the case that all English teachers have a contract which requires them to engage in some meeting activity after the end of the school day. So there's that time available as well. But this is within contracted time. Does that answer your question? Okay, yeah.
I have a methodological question.
Okay.
And in comparative education, we are obsessed with the question with what cases are used or paired. And it's a very important question for us. So that design of pairing schools that are similar in context but different in outcomes, I would call that's the typical best practices approach. You learn something from a system that is as poor as you are, as diverse as you are, but it's outperforming. Later on in your talk, which is an interesting design, it's like totally different than globalization design, where you take totally different systems and show how they become similar. Now you, in your talk, what's happening usually with the best practices design is in the second stage, it becomes packaged. Mm-hmm. And then it's disseminated like wildfire to systems that are not similar.
Yep.
And isn't this what happened in the UK? You attributed it to change in government and economic crisis and all that. Isn't it the life of the policy that's the problem, rather than just the context that has changed? In all these best practices approaches, the second phase is dissemination.
Yep.
And that's where it's not anymore paired with similar schools. It's only those 6 points that you highlighted or whatever is considered the success story.
Okay, it's a good question. You may have spotted a couple of times in that presentation that I sort of stumbled over the slides because I had got, because when I sent this in last week, I hadn't pulled it together. I've got some of the models of families that were used to map that out, and it might have been useful to look at those. I think that there's probably three things to say in answer to your question. I think that this is worth remembering, this is an action project rather than a research project. And I think its methodological design is actually pretty inductive. And I've given you the story at the end. There's quite a lot of build it as we go. Nobody quite realized what it was going to look like when this happened. Ministers and school district leaders looked at school performance data in London in 2002 and said, you know, this cannot go on. We have to do something without quite knowing what it was. So it's built inductively rather than on a particular design. I think in terms of dissemination, something happens around this being, this isn't a dissemination model. This is a London-wide model from the very beginning. Everybody is involved, and everybody has got something to contribute. And Tim Brighouse, who ran London Challenge in its early years, says that one of the most successful things he did, which he never realized was going to be successful, is when you look at the weakest families of schools, what do you call them? You know, and generally in urban education, they could go failing schools, or you know, we've got this word inner city, which is a sort of synonym for decaying, drug-ridden, and so on. And Tim didn't call them that. He called them keys to success. And that's suddenly changed the way people thought about them. You know, if we get it right in these schools, we get it right everywhere. They're the key to success. So there's a lot of management of attitudes and commitment that is going on within London. Now, the third thing to say, which I think is stronger on dissemination, is that we did try, after 2007, to export London Challenge to some other parts of England. And there are three other areas. There's a Manchester Challenge, which also worked pretty well. And there are two others. There's a Black Country. The Black Country is an area of the Midlands that was called the Black Country because in the 19th century these were smoke-blackened buildings. And it didn't work as well there. And it didn't work as well in the northeast either. And there's something, I think, about the identity of the area that you're trying to do it in. London and Manchester have very strong civic identities anyway. The Black Country and the northeast are a bit more vague. And I think that's where the dissemination notion just doesn't work. You've got to have some fertile ground for quite a lot of this to happen in. One of the things that we did not do in London Challenge was to offer pre-packaged solutions. The key to the way London Challenge worked for teachers was that we developed a series of programs called the Improving Teaching Programme, the Excellent Teacher Programme, and the Outstanding Teacher Programme. And they all work on the same model, and they're not scalable, but they're pretty successful. So you get a group of teachers, 15, quite an important number, from a range of schools. And these teachers are going to work in triads. So you've now got 5 groups of 3 across different schools. And what the advisor will do is you've probably got a group of teachers together where we really got to work on their behaviour management. Okay. But we're going to work on the assumption that if anybody is going to change, they're going to have to change from here, not from here. Right? I've got to understand what I need to do better. And somebody else, whether it's Chris Husbands or God, telling me what to do, isn't going to get me there. So the way the triads work are everybody gets to observe each other and start to diagnose what's going on in each other's classrooms. And then it works on a 3-2-1 model. Everybody observes 3 lessons, Everybody plans 2, everybody teaches 1 for the other 2 to see. And throughout the program, there's a heck of a lot of debriefing. And that model really worked. It was able, demonstrably, and there's a really good evaluation of the Improving Teacher Program by Peter Matthews from the IOE. And if you Google Peter Matthews Outstanding Teacher Program, or maybe the Improving Teacher Program, really was a powerful motor for improving teaching. So the answer to your question is yes. We did get people to do things differently, but we got people to build what they needed to do differently. There's quite a lot of pressure. You know, you've been identified, there's a problem here, we're being honest and open about the problem, but we're not going to give you a pre-packaged solution. You're going to build the solution.
My question is fairly simple, and you began to answer it, but I think there's a larger answer maybe that we need. What role, if any, did higher education play in the success story that you just related to us?
Okay, that is a very good question. So, I mean, there is a, if we've got people clamoring to come into the room, the answer is that you could have done all of this without higher education. So that the teacher improvement programs are not credentialed, they're not accredited and so on. Local higher education is doing 3 things. One of them is that we created, there's lots of other things I didn't talk about, created something called Chartered London Teacher. This was for excellent teacher practitioners. It was a status, and there's a bit of a salary uplift if you got Chartered London Teacher status, and that was run through higher education. We were assessors and designers. An awful lot of evaluation and a lot of formative evaluation. There is a final evaluation. It happened to be in Merrin Hutchins at the University of East London, but there was a lot of formative evaluation, so build as we go. And some of those advisors, in fact, what's the best neutral place to put the office for the advisors? And that was at the IOE. It was run through the London Centre for Leadership in Learning. So the answer is it's in there, but it's sort of not central to the design.